much better way. So maybe what I'll do is I'll kind of wrap a bow around what the panel has done and maybe set up some questions, whether they come as part of the panel or they come afterwards. Earlier, somebody was referring to just having come back from Cannes and the International Real Estate Conference there was actually called MIPIM. Last year I gave a keynote speech at MIPIM talking about where the direction of innovation in real estate is going. And at the end of the day, while a lot of you in this room deal with real estate, while we deal with real estate as developers, I got to tell you, innovation is not about real estate at all. As a matter of fact, real estate is kind of the easy part of the equation. The more difficult part is to really understand what that innovation landscape and what that real estate will enable. And so it really comes, and we've heard this many times, talent is the real currency of innovation. Absolutely nothing substitutes for it, and everything follows it. So I see about 75 to 100 cities around the world a year. This is all I do. And full disclosure, I do sit on Bruce Katz's board at Brookings for the innovation districts, and so Rise of Innovation Districts is a good read for everybody, but there was actually one that came out a week ago. And it is absolutely about design and how the design creates activation, innovation, and placemaking. It was done by Julie Wagner, who is Bruce Katz's co-author on the Rise of Innovation District, so you might want to go on the Brookings website and look at that one. But so if we think about what this innovation landscape looks like, we have this idea of talent, and innovation, if you walk around the research park here, or you go to other parks, you'll see that innovation really these days has become entirely a social enterprise. Right? It changes the nature of our work and where that work is located, what those environments are like, right? The rise of, if you will, co-working and other kinds of models. As a matter of fact, in 2009, across the United States, there were 16 co-working centers. Today, there are over 35,000 of them. Now, afterwards, I'm happy to talk to you about what I see a shakeout coming in about 24 months and what that's going to mean for different models. But the survivors are going to be those that are really aligned with these kind of epicenters of talent. In other words, ones that sit within proximity of a major university. This still changes the nature of work. And because I have co-working, we've heard about other things, right? Maker spaces and shared lab kind of environments, and all of these really play into it. And it plays into this concept of capital efficiency, demand really alive. And so all of that kind of comes together. Now, Richard Florida writes a lot about the creative class, and that's great. But it isn't so much just about that. It's about what do you do with that creative class to create real estate that is more creative and productive than its sheer economics, right? And so what I'm seeing out there is it isn't just an economic decision. Sure, real estate is one of the largest operating expenses a company has, but it doesn't sit, or if they're doing it right, should not sit just on the balance sheet as only a number, right? So if you don't believe me, go to Kendall Square, go to one of those buildings and ask somebody what they're paying at number 1 Main Street, right, or at 75 Kendall. And they're paying north of, for lab space, north of $95 a square foot. The same thing's true in the East River, the same thing's happening in San Diego. So there's much less expensive real estate out there. Why do they want to be there? They want to be there because that environment is more creative and productive. I can do things in that environment that I cannot do in a suburban tech park, or that I cannot do in a build-to-suit in a lesser environment or in a Class B building somewhere. Why? Well, it really is this idea of this kind of density within proximity to intellectual capital, right? Exactly where we are sitting this morning is that kind of model, and you don't have to go much further than looking out the windows or just taking a quick walk around to see all of the companies that want to be here, because not just the proximity to the university, but the access, the relationships, the infrastructure, the things that they can do that Laura and her team have made possible that they might not be able to do anywhere else. Go back to the top one, it's all about talent, right? For them, and I've not seen this in many other places, which is why I think it's interesting, as I walk around and looked at those buildings, the names on the outsides of the buildings. In a lot of places, you don't have the names on the outside of the building. Why do I suspect they are here? because it is a branding initiative for each of these institutions as well. They are competing for the very best students coming out of the University of Illinois. They want those students to understand that this isn't their father's Caterpillar or Boeing or AbbVie, but this is a new kind of company. I expect if I walk in those spaces, they're a little bit edgier and cooler than the spaces I would find on any of those companies' traditional campuses. So it's very important to be able to kind of have that kind of environment. Because it really, there's some new players that I see, Yahoos and the others as well, you see, because you got new entrants who are competing for this talent. New entrants looking to disrupt traditional markets. Right, so we ran something called the Boeing Innovation Challenge in St. Louis. In one of our projects there, Boeing ran it in an environment that we've got them in called PhantomWorks. And it really is just about throwing out patents that Boeing had for anybody to be able to innovate off of. And the winner was somebody that took technology that Boeing used to x-ray the wings of airplanes and was able to use it as a technology to look inside the human body. Right? Now Boeing is in healthcare, right? And so when you see that, Google is in healthcare. People are coming to disrupt non-traditional, non-traditional players are coming to disrupt these kinds of markets. And so all this talent gets even more and more important. I mean, all the movements in the cluster theory starts to be changed quite a bit. And then the final of these things really is, at the end of the day, innovation can and must create social and economic inclusion. And so I love what Calvin was talking about. I was just last week with Leslie Harrison, who's the Ward 5 alderman. Is she? Well, I would love to talk to you about it because we had a great conversation about what's possible there. And in the 4th Ward, I was with Sophia King, right? Because we're thinking about what's happening around the Polsky Center at the University of Chicago, that Laura talked about other assets within the city. And so the buildings that we have done, we have 13 projects around the country, in West Baltimore, right? In West Philadelphia, in Lambert's Point in Norfolk, Virginia, in Overtown in Miami. We're about 5 minutes from Ferguson in St. Louis where we reside. So we reside within some very proud but traditionally disenfranchised populations and communities. And so one of the keys to creating this kind of inclusion is to make sure you're creating an environment that is accretive, right? That's authentic, that's accretive to the neighborhoods in how you do that. So we believe that these challenges can really be addressed through creating this kind of collaborative environment, very much like the one that you've already heard about. But for us, it resides on 4 pillars. And the primal pillar for us is obviously the university. And so I kind of talked about the importance of making sure that you have a relationship with the institution. That's why they sit here in the research part. That's why they sit in Cortex, or that might be why they sit at the Chesterfield or one of our other projects, because they want that relationship with the institution, making more creative and productive ground. But it goes a little bit farther than just that as well. So when you're also thinking about this environment and kind of what's happening with that university, it's about the university being able to create and keep its talent, right? So there's a lot of universities out there that have their own incubators, lots of them, they're great. And there's a lot of cities that have helped them think through those incubators. But what they haven't done is they haven't thought through the next order after incubation, right? What happens when that company is successful? And so you look at places, and in fact, I'll tell you, Austin, Texas has this problem, right? So Austin, everybody thinks about being a great innovation city, which it is. But in Austin, Texas, they have a lot of co-working at the Capital Factory and the Coop and WeWork and all those guys downtown. And what happens, though, with those companies is once they outgrow those, then they go looking for real estate. Where do they end up? They end up at the Arboretum or up on Research or Breaker, or they end up in Westlake, or they end up over at J. Pickle, or they end up in South Congress. In other words, what starts to happen is that tight clustering effect of startup companies begins to bleed along a large spatial geography, right? For years, people have talked about Chicago punching below its weight in innovation. It really doesn't, but if you take a look at the amount of space between the intellectual capital of Chicago and you map out where the cities are, they spread over 525 square miles. So that's kind of the problem. There's a lot going on, but it's so dispersed. So how do you kind of create besides just centers of gravity, centers of gravity and congregation as well. So we think that's very important. And so that's kind of what you start talking about when you talk about the built environment, right? How do you have these kinds of engaging built environments that are heavily programming dependent to get researchers out of their labs, to get corporate innovators out of their offices, to get entrepreneurs to start to come, to get thought leaders all to mix with artists and musicians and designers and others. And so that's why some of these innovation centers like the Cambridge Innovation Center or Venture Cafe out of Boston, or a number of the programs that you'll find in 1871 in Chicago or 1776 in DC, all of them start to become so important, right? Is to get these kind of people out there. It's also why you're seeing the move of the millennials into environments that feature this, right? So somebody mentioned Research Triangle. Hey, Research Triangle is a great place, right? You have 3 major universities, you got 3 really good cities, you got a great airport, you got a lot happening. Guess what? The new companies and the millennials are not going to the Research Triangle Park at all. They're going to downtown Durham to sit at the American Underground, or to be at the Chesterfield, or to be in Brightleaf Square. Or now they're looking at, Chapel Hill and UNC are looking to do their own, right? NC State has a Centennial campus, but it's really too far away. It's thinking, how can I do something right in downtown Raleigh as well? They're looking to leverage what they have as an environment to create this kind of activated sense of place. And that's why all of the new companies that are coming in that Triangle area, many of them are landing there in downtown. Now, it's interesting to see that dynamic happening across the landscape when it comes to these kinds of larger environments with kind of these satellites that are bouncing out. I was in Providence last week giving a speech at the Life Sciences Summit, and somebody asked me, well, we've got this challenge. We're just an hour from Boston. We're an hour and a half from New York. And I think you were talking about it as well when one of the companies here, and I said, yeah, turn that around. You're only an hour from Boston, right? And so how do you leverage that kind of environment? For the first time, I was telling somebody this over coffee this morning, for the first time I am starting to see cracks in this kind of what I will call cost of doing business in gateway cities. Right, so the paying $95 a square foot in New York, or paying it in Kendall Square, or paying it in San Francisco, I'm starting to see cracks. And by what I mean by starting to see cracks is, you're now starting to see the emergence of these complementary cities to gateway cities that still feature strong intellectual capital, good agglomerated talent markets, excellent business environment, strong housing market, diverse, good transportation to that major city, and then outstanding quality of life. And so Providence, Rhode Island fits in that, as does a lot of cities. Manchester fits in it in the UK, Lyon in France. There's a whole number of those. What we're also looking at is we're seeing the opportunity to take that even one step further. We believe that the growth for these kinds of knowledge and innovation districts actually is going to come in the United States from Tier 1 research institutions sitting in traditional, what I'll call college towns, Tier 3 markets, right? And I put this as #1 on the list, right? In West Lafayette, Indiana, Gainesville, Florida, and a few others. But really, you have that incredible kind of opportunity. And so as we kind of look about how that environment plays, it becomes very, very important. So as we look at these things beginning to evolve, everything in orange is programming. Everything in black is real estate. So it kind of goes back to what I was saying before. If you can get the programming, the activation, the collaboration of these things right, relationships with the university, right, the right kind of mentoring, the right kind of talent, as it all comes together, the real estate tends to figure itself out because there's lots of smart people in the room who can do that. But if you can't do that, what you're going to end up with are these isolated, siloed kind of buildings that really aren't delivering the kinds of innovation that you want. And I can point to a number of major cities around the country that have innovation districts, and they wonder why they have 2 buildings and nobody comes, and why they don't have anything more than a little cafe inside that's open 2 hours a day, and why at 5 o'clock everybody runs to the parking lot to get in their cars to drive somewhere else.
that really isn't the kind of environment that good, strong placemaking supports. It's not the kind of environment you find here. It's not the kind of environment that we look for in other places where the top talent looks for as well. And I'll also tell you, the Maslow's hierarchy of need changes by generation, and it changes over time, right? And so one of the things when we did this in Baltimore that I said Baltimore really needed to focus on was fixing public schools, right? Because it's one thing to be a millennial or Gen Z, Generation Z, which is the generation coming up behind the millennials. Their hierarchy of needs is really good entertainment, a good job, interesting things to do, good walkability, right? As soon as you get married, security starts to flip up in there, and as soon as you have children, schools and security go right to the top of the list. So what we're actually seeing is that's causing this kind of diaspora. Once I have children, right, as a millennial or a younger generation, I'm now looking at my inner ring suburbs, or I'm looking at my college towns in good proximity to the major cities, because they still have good schools, and that's where I can go. Who's replacing them? The baby boomers. Folks whose kids are now out of college are looking to downsize. We're starting to see swaps. Now, I'm seeing them in those inner rings, not in these outer rings. So if you're, somebody mentioned Cincinnati, Ohio. If you're familiar with Cincinnati, Ohio, you're seeing it in that inner ring inside 275 in communities like Wyoming and others. You're not seeing it yet farther out in Mason and those places. They're a lot farther, like kind of McMansion kind of communities. But this kind of hierarchy of needs changes quite a bit. Now, what I want to leave you with is kind of one challenge. And it really is this challenge that we see this social and this economic disparity continues to increase. And it's putting an enormous amount of pressure, particularly on inner cities. But you know what? Rural communities have their own problems, right, with the disparity in wealth. And so what we believe is there's a number of things one needs to think. I'll tell you one story and then I'll get out of the way. The story I'm going to tell you is about Baltimore, right? So the University of Maryland Biopark, the UMB Biopark, sits west of MLK, right? People never thought you could go west of MLK in Baltimore because it's kind of a rough place, like going east, right? So Baltimore is divided east and west. East Baltimore is Hopkins, West Baltimore is the University of Maryland, all the professional schools, shock trauma, School of Medicine, dentistry, pharmacy, nursing, all sit there, and there's this dividing line. And going west of MLK brings you into kind of 7 neighborhoods that are pretty tough: Poppleton, Sandtown, Pigtown, Holland's Market, a few of the others. These are communities that fight each other in front of city council for resources, literally fight each other on the streets sometimes for territory and turf, and an environment that was just very, very difficult. So that but the University of Maryland is landlocked. The only way they could expand was to go west. So when we went west to start to create the UMB Biopark, first thing we thought about is we need to be able to engage the community. And how do you engage the community? You've got to be accretive. How can I be accretive? I need to demystify buildings. I need for people to understand what happens inside of these buildings. And so in addition to all the community outreach and all the stuff that one does as part of the natural process of doing a building, as soon as the buildings were up, what we started to do, one of the first events we held, was trick or treat. Now, trick or treat doesn't sound like much unless you're a kid in West Baltimore who has nowhere safe to trick or treat. So what we did was we worked with the 3 elementary schools that were right around our catchment there in West Baltimore. And each of those elementary schools would come in to trick or treat the biopark. What that meant was they could come in costume, their teachers would bring them, plenty of police were there to make sure that they could get there nice and safely. And then they'd come in and they'd go into a conferencing center very much like this, set up with tables that were all of the companies that are represented in the UMB, where they would trick or treat the tables and see that people who looked like them worked in these companies as well. And that started a conversation. Then throughout the year, we augment that with folks like Bill Nye the Science Guy and others who come in and do programming that we sponsor for the schools, bringing them again into the park and getting them acclimated to science, technology, engineering, math, healthcare kinds of jobs. At James B. McHenry, which is the middle school to which those 3 filter, the University of Maryland, Wexford kind of created this environment 2 computer labs. Maryland did the curriculum for it, and now they're getting exposed to life sciences as part of the classroom curriculum. We worked with the city to take Vivian Thomas High School, which is the high school, the University of Maryland, Wexford, and Southwest Partnership, because over time we actually brought those 7 neighborhoods together into a cohesive force and made that a biotechnology high school. And now as you come out of that school, you are guaranteed admission into the Baltimore City Community College's Life Science Institute, which we put on the 2nd floor of one of our buildings, and guaranteed every student of that program, they would be invited to every single event, every single piece of programming, but most importantly, they were all guaranteed an internship with the companies within the bioclub. Now, many of those students went on to work for those companies, but over time we've seen a switch. Fewer students have gone on to work for the companies, and more have chosen to go to the University of Maryland and complete their 4-year degree in laboratory sciences. Now, everything that I just said is within a 10-minute walk, right? And so all of this programming coming together is creating this workforce continuum, because I'll tell you, while you're sitting in the middle of one of the world's preeminent research universities that graduates incredible graduates, 40 to 50% of the jobs in an innovation district do not require a 4-year. And so when people talk about workforce, when companies look at workforce, they are also looking at that technician class, that coder class, that class that doesn't require the 4-year degree out of a premier institution. Where is that class going to come from as well? And so in the Baltimore City Community College, in other programs that we do, Launch Code and others, it's how you take then these disenfranchised populations and create pathways to job retraining. The average age of the student at BCCC is 29. So you have some of the ones coming out of high school, but you also have a significant portion of the population from the neighborhoods getting retrained on today's jobs, and we think that's so vital in creating this. So I'm sorry if I've gone on a little bit too long. All the smart stuff was already said, so I thought maybe I'd just share a few of the experiences with how we look at this. So thank you very much for your time.